Good afternoon, everybody. So, in the pre-election environment for Zambia, the preparations began with the issuance of the national voter registration cards, which was done by the Ministry of Home Affairs. During that exercise, we noticed that a number of inconsistencies were observed, especially when you looked at the number of people that had successfully managed to get their national registration cards in the ruling party then, which was the Patriotic Front, and UPND, which was the opposition areas. So the areas in which the ruling party considered their strongholds, the success rates were higher in the opposition strongholds. From there, we saw the Electoral Commission of Zambia beginning to issue voter registration cards. The voter registration process in itself was quite slow. It was, first of all, the commission decided to develop a whole new register to try and get rid of all the dead voters and everything. So in trying to clean up that register, they decided to create a new register. The new register was done from the 19th of November to about 12th of December. A time frame that a lot of stakeholders thought was too short for a new register in comparison to previous years. And in addition to that, the commission only gave a 4-day extension period at some point on the 17th of December. So that start of the process created a bit of apprehension from stakeholders in terms of how the EMB was managing the process, because they were not very consultative in the decisions they made. And where there was public outcry, there wasn't much consideration on their part. We moved on to the campaign period. In the campaign period, we saw that we had escalated cases of violence across the country. And this violence was being perpetrated by the two parties, the United Party for National Development and the Patriotic Front. There were a number of casualties, there were deaths, and we also saw that the Electoral Commission, in trying to manage that environment, they suspended the UPND and the PF from campaigning in a number of provinces across the country. They later on lifted the suspension, but they also suspended some individuals from the ruling party who were peddling hate speech and things that were going against the Electoral Code of Conduct. Other than the deaths that we saw, the violence, the politically motivated violence spilled over to election day, but I'll come back to that. We saw that it continued until election day, where deaths were recorded. One of the chairpersons of the ruling party then was killed in the course of doing his work on 12th August, which was election day. And the former mayor of Lusaka, who was at the time contesting to be a parliamentarian, was stabbed alongside his security personnel. So the violence was quite a problem. We also saw a bit of politicization. I know that you mentioned COVID-19. We held our elections in the context of COVID-19, but there was a bit of politicization of the COVID environment, in that at a point campaign rallies were banned. But we still saw the ruling, the incumbent president at the time, the former president rather, at the time, going around opening things, launching things with a lot of people, and most of those events really looked like campaign rallies. There was very little adherence to COVID-19 mitigation measures across the board from all the political parties as they went around discharging their work. And technically, there were a lot of inconsistency in the rules that were being applied in the campaign period. So from there, I think we moved on to look at how, I think I've talked a little bit about how the EMB was conducting itself. They managed the election quite successfully, but there were two challenges with the ruling party. One was that there wasn't much, they were not very consultative in the processes that were taking place. They had very poor communication. Most times they communicated a lot of things last minute. For instance, when civil society and other stakeholders were about to accredit their observers, the announcement was made very late. They introduced a whole lot of new rules and requirements that required certification. It was quite a complex process that they all had to be aware of within a very limited time. So it challenged a number of organizations from being able to deploy observers, including the fact that they were reducing the number of observers that were permitted by organizations to go and observe the elections per constituency. The media environment was quite polarized. In Zambia, the media is very much polarized. The national media is responsible for providing equal coverage according to the Electoral Code of Conduct. However, in doing that work, we noticed that the national broadcaster was very biased towards the ruling party, and the independent media itself was equally polarized. Some pro the ruling party, some anti the ruling party. It was not a very level playing field. I think that in itself describes the pre-election environment. On election day, what we saw was that, first of all, there was an internet shutdown that happened on the 12th. And that internet shutdown came after a team of organizations, including mine, had written to the president and other stakeholders not to shut down the internet. We were told that they had no such intentions, but the internet was shut down, not entirely, but partially. Social media in particular, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Telegram. And then when it was shut down, people began to use Facebook to share virtual private networks that they could use to access. And some of them were shut down in the course of the day. So there was a legal action that was taken by one of the local organizations. They went for a judicial review, and that is where the Zambia Information Communication Technology Authority was actually asked by the court to open up, and 2 days later, the rest of the networks that had been shut down were restored. So this was the pre-election environment and the election day environment. On election day itself, one of the saddest things that we saw was the deaths of 2 people in the northwestern part of the country. They were killed whilst doing their work in northwestern province. That was the chairperson of the Patriotic Front, who was killed by a mob. He was beaten to death. So I think that gives a sense of what the pre-election and the election environment was in Zambia.
Thank you so much, Susan. Quite interesting in terms of the issues and the dynamics that were alive around in the ground in terms of the pre-election period. And I think it must have been a very difficult situation in terms of preparing and organizing an election in an environment such as that. I will come back to you in terms of some of the issues that you raised, but for now, I'll go to Arnold. Arnold, I'm gonna make reference to an article that was written by Sishua and Nick Chesman in an article titled 3 Lessons from Africa, from the Zambian Landslide Opposition Victory. They said that nothing that happened in Zambia shifts the political reality in Cameroon, Uganda, or Zimbabwe. HH success can only be repeated if the conditions that gave Zambia's democratic, or if, they say that the HH success can only be repeated if the conditions that gave rise to it are also replicated in these or 3 other countries that I've mentioned. They go further to say, put in another way, Zambia's democratic success story will only inspire change elsewhere if the political context and the strategy used by the opposition parties and civil society groups are reproduced. That will be extremely difficult in more authoritarian states with less experience of the will of the people determining who holds power. And in some countries, it will be close to impossible in the near future. I would like to kind of like get your thinking into this statement and your reflections in terms of whether this is something that speaks of our country. If the conditions that were described by Susan were prevailing in Zambia and they managed to do so, is this statement hold true when it comes to Zimbabwe? And what are the issues that we can look at in terms of trying to go around such issues?
Thank you, Taona, and let me congratulate the organizers for assembling this meeting and to yourself for chairing it. Yeah, I didn't read that article by Sishua and Professor Chisman, but from what you've just said, it is clear that they were basically reinforcing the notion that context is everything. And context is everything simply means that you can have a situation where there's a one size fit all. So you then have to be able to draw lessons from what happened in Zambia and adapt them to what the context in Uganda, in Cameroon, in Zimbabwe can allow. So they're not saying that it's completely impossible for what happened in Zambia to happen in Zimbabwe, in Uganda, in Cameroon. They're saying it can happen, but for it to happen, you need to be able to figure out what appropriate social and political reforms, including legal reforms, that are needed, and that can be achieved in the context of how those countries have in terms of a political culture. So in Zimbabwe, it's true that the political culture of peaceful transfer of power following elections has not yet embedded itself, even though in Zambia it started in 1991 with President Kenneth Kaunda when he lost to President Chiluba. And he said that there's more to life than just being a president, and that the essence of democracy is that you have to accept when you lose power. For him, he saw loss of power in a democratic election as a progressive political development in Zambia. And that naturally distinguished him from our own President Mugabe, who, when he lost power, clearly in 2008, said that the ballot cannot beat the bullet. And therefore, the participation in elections was therefore just a mere tool from that statement to use elections as an instrument to retain power. But then quite clearly, he also was quite prophetic because he lost power not as a result of the ballot, but as a result of the bullet and the gun. If soldiers had not teamed up against him with the current ruling elite in Zimbabwe, you will not have lost power. So I think that culture is what Sishua and Professor Chisman are referring to, that you have to have a leadership that is willing to accept that the authority to govern is derived from the mandate of the people that is freely expressed in elections. And once that mental shift is accepted by those who fought for the liberation of our country and have now become the albatross that prevents Zimbabweans from being able to see the image of a leadership that represents truly the votes that they will have made in elections that are free and fair. That shift is necessary. So, but then in shifts, those shifts don't come voluntarily sometimes. They say power concedes to nothing. And therefore, it is up to the people to have greater levels of organization. So the political parties have to be more organized and to demonstrate that they are an alternative government in waiting. It means they have to have internal democracy. They have to have effective participation of all people, including women, including the youth, the people even with LGBTI communities, generally marginalized and underrepresented communities, need to have access and effective participation and inclusion in politics. Within the opposition, they also must have clear policy propositions like what HH had around fighting corruption, patronage, as well as having a clear economic model that they propose as a policy that attracts people to them. And then above that, you then build strong institutions of civil society. If you have got strong institutions of civil society, like what happened in Zambia, where you had pro-democracy activists, you have people like Pilato, the Bototos, who were able to get into prison and out of prison, but consistently send messages that we are not going to allow this country not to be democratic. Then you also have news diggers, you have bloggers, you have citizen journalists. And I think within the security sector, one person who comes out very clearly from Zambia, who shows what our own law enforcement agents need to think about in terms of constitutionalism, is Jason. There's a guy called Jason Chipepa Musonda, who resigned from the police force because of the fact that the PF cadres were invading police and taking command and control of police stations and then instrumentalizing the police force. So a courageous policeman stood up and said, no, this can't happen in my country. And he was, of course, charged with desertion. And I'm just hoping that the new leadership in the country will proceed to remove those charges. And then on the question of the election management body, you know, there was a lack of transparency and there was not enough cooperation. But then the fact that civil society and pro-democracy forces and the opposition were able to set up things like the parallel voter tabulations, where it was very clear that they knew exactly how the election had gone, and that even if there's no enough cooperation from the election management body, they would be able to challenge if results had been manipulated. So that threat factor plays a strong deterrence that makes even an election management body that has no cooperation to actually be able to release the correct results. And then maybe one aspect which is not necessarily a Zambian aspect, but which comes out of that election is the fact that the international election observer missions, I think for the first time since COVID arose, maybe since 2018 or 2019 in Kenya, where they made pronouncements around free and fairness of elections, which were then overturned by the courts. But this time around, you could see a very positive role that international observer missions played, including the political leaders who headed those missions. And so when President Kikwete, as well as the former president of Ivory Coast, were working with the former President Banda, you could see that it was possible in a situation of greatest threat to peaceful transition, they were able to neutralize. And in the process, there was harmony between international observer missions and local observer missions. And I think it's a big lesson that observers need to learn about. And then I've talked about Banda and the fact that you need these political figureheads. If President Banda, who lost to President Sata, had not come forward and worked with President Lungu to cancel him and accept results, the situation could have been tricky. But in Zimbabwe, we need to develop that type of leadership. We don't have any now because the current leaders since independence in 1980 have stuck to the position that they don't want to be statespersons who can then be relied on at critical moments when the nation needs them. So I agree to some extent with what Professor Chisman and Shishua say. But at the same time, I think we still have enough lessons that give us confidence that maybe electoral democracy is yet to entrench itself in Zimbabwe. Over to you, Tawana.
Thank you so much, Arnold. And I think you kind of like discuss issues that draw parallels with the situation us in terms of trying to unpack whether the situation pertaining in Zambia in the build-up to the election and the situation also in Zimbabwe, are there any familiarities to the extent to which we can then be able to say we can draw lessons from Zambia to try and help our situation in Zimbabwe? I'll come back to you on that as we go into the discussion. But I would like to, at this stage, I wanted to build the political context, but I've got a request from Dr. Commissioner Kwibani Moyo, who would like to rush for another meeting, but I will go to him, particularly as we reflect on the administration of the elections itself. And Commissioner, I would like to quote from the EU Observer Mission preliminary statement, which said that against the background of the COVID-19, the Electoral Commission of Zambia carried out its work professionally under challenging circumstances. In the preparations of the elections, technical aspects of the process were well managed. Now, despite the COVID-19 challenges, the electoral process was technically well managed. That was the EU preliminary statement. Now, following up on that, what lessons do we take from Zambia on holding elections during COVID-19 pandemic. And is it possible within the context of Zimbabwe that we could actually achieve such a feat as that happened in Zambia? I would like to kind of get from you in terms of lessons learned on how to conduct elections within a pandemic environment.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this panel. You want to start by saying that Zimbabwe has consistently held elections whenever they are due since its independence. We have never missed any election. However, the current environment under which we find ourselves in, which is a global phenomena, has seen us having had to postpone some of the elections that we are supposed to have because of the pandemic. We currently have a situation where we have a number of local government and also a number of parliamentary seats that are vacant that we want to have elections on. The Commission, however, finds itself in a very difficult situation in that there is current statutory instruments or legislation that has been put in place. Rather, there's an SI that has been put in place in terms of the health emergency that does not allow the holding of elections. So even if we wanted to do that now, we cannot do that. However,
Commissioner, can I just maybe jump in there? I'm also trying to look at parallels and drawing parallels in terms of what happened in Zambia. These were national elections that cover the whole country. The same in Malawi, these were national elections that cover the whole country. And they were actually held in even worse off conditions compared to ourselves. In your engagement with the either the executive, parliament, and the government, do you also advise them that these are conditions that you can be able to conduct elections? And is ZEC in a position, or is it prepared to conduct elections within this environment?
Well, I was still developing my argument, and my answer really lies in that the current environment under which we find ourselves in terms of the law that has been put in place, in terms of the healthy emergency, makes it impossible for us to hold elections. You will want to know that whereas the Commission is tasked with the task of managing the elections, the actual proclamation of the election dates are done by the President, and the current health emergency laws have made it impossible for that proclamation to come. Secondly, you know that there's also a High Court challenge in terms of the constitutionality of the SI that has been put in place. It also puts us in a very difficult position. I want to rewind and say that some time back in the last 18 months or so, the Commission had put a date to say that we wanted to have elections within a certain period of time. But the health emergency laws came in and put us off guard. Is the Commission ready to hold elections under these conditions? The Commission does have in place a COVID a policy in place in terms of what can be done to mitigate against the problems. But this must be understood in the context of the entire national health emergency. You said...
can you unmute?
But yes, you spoke about Malawi and Zambia, and we have held elections under these conditions. My answer to that would be to say that there has been a difference in approach in terms of dealing with COVID in each and every country. And therefore, it's not a one-size-fits-all. The circumstances and the environment and the reaction and response in those countries are different from how our authorities have taken it here. You may also want to put our situation and juxtapose to what has been happening in South Africa, where the IEC itself has been having challenges to an extent of setting up a commission to see on the feasibility of holding elections under these conditions, which recommendation was it would be very difficult to have conditions. We know that they are moving ahead, with caution, but their response is also been almost similar like ours. So we certainly will be holding elections when government puts in place the required laws to allow for proper holding of these elections.
Thank you, Commissioner. But anyway, I would like to say, and then I would move on to the next question, that I don't think that the conditions are relatively different anyway, given the magnitude of the elections that Zambia has just had, and also given the magnitude of elections that Malawi, Uganda, and several other countries that have actually held elections during this pandemic have actually managed to do so. But anyway, I'll get back to that. But one thing that I wanted to check with you, Commissioner, is one of the things that the Zambia Election Commission is credited for doing very well was its ability to engage with stakeholders and the enforcement of the code of conduct. Like Susan had indicated, several candidates and campaigns were suspended, and its ability to manage the results was something that was also mentioned. For instance, the presidential election results were announced in conjunction with the rest of results, unlike in our situation where our presidential results are announced separately. All these points to aspects of trying to ensure transparency within the results management process. In addition, all political parties were given access to the results verification center, and results were announced after all political parties have signed off on the results. Are these lessons that we can also take to inform the Zimbabwean elections, given that they are best practices and they are also enhance the transparency of the results management process as well as the electoral process? And is this something that ZEC can also learn from? Is this something that ZEC can also implement?
I think first and foremost, what I can say is that there are, of course, a few lessons that can be learned from Zambia. Some of these lessons already are lessons that we have been sharing as fellow members of the Southern African Elections Forum, SADC ECF, where we meet as electoral bodies of Southern Africa. You have spoken about the results transmission situation in Zimbabwe. I'm not sure how we get it wrong, if we get it wrong, because our current situation is that the results, rather immediately after we finish the elections, we count the ballots in each polling station, and we make sure that after counting, polling agents of all contesting political parties that are present there will verify the results and they sign for them, and then we display them outside the polling station. This is for both the presidential and the local government as well as the House of Assembly elections. So they are posted outside polling stations. It's exactly where they are counted. So we display these immediately after the elections. I'm sure that's something that lies, which is part of the SADC protocol in terms of holding of elections. You then also say that the results of the parliamentary elections in Zambia were announced alongside the results of the presidential at the national level. That requires, if we're to go by that here, it requires a change of legislation in terms of the Electoral Act, because the requirements in terms of our electoral laws are that the parliamentary election results or winners are declared at a constituency level where they will have been collected. But when it comes to the presidential, they are announced at a national level. That's the, I mean, all the results put together. So it's a bit different.
But is it something that you can say is a best practice that you can adopt as a means of trying to enhance transparency of the process? Because I think some of the contentious issues that are arising out of that is that lack of tallying results to the extent to which you cannot necessarily see where the parliamentary results are tallying with the presidential results to some extent, and I think people have raised those issues. Do you think that's something we can adopt in Zimbabwe? Is it something that we might consider?
Well, I'm not seeing much difference from what happens in Zambia, because, like I said, that we count the presidential elections right at the polling station.
No, but I'm now talking at the announcement level. At the announcement level.
Well, at a personal level, I'm really not seeing much lesson out of that, because because I think for me what is important is the primary source of the election counting, which happens at the polling station level, where everyone has got access to get all the data of what has happened there. But I wanted also to come in and say that one thing that we saw in Zambia was a very high voter turnout of about 70% or so. I stand to bracket around it. But I also want to point that this is very good for the region that is high voter turnout. But remember, in Zimbabwe, in the last election, our voter turnout was actually 86.7%. One of the highest, ever to happen in the region. We had a lot of young people that had come in to register. Registration was overwhelming because we had done biometric voter registration, and it was a current voters roll. So clearly, there was a lot that happened in our previous election that I'm sure informed how our sister commissions did their business, in the region. But like every other election, we meet, we discuss, we learn something from them. But for now, what we see in Zambia is what we have always shared as a sister electoral commissions.
Well, I mean, I think maybe there might be a difference. Of course, maybe we might not be very much aware. But what we know is in Zambia, political parties were actually given access to the tally center to the extent to which they were actually certifying results that they had at the polling station level. And I think what we also noted in terms of managing the results were announced at the tally center, that is the national tally center, after all political parties have signed off on the results. And I think we only had one set of results that was announced, unlike in Zimbabwe, where we had three sets of results that were announced. But one thing that I also wanted to check with you as a best practice, the use of the code of conduct and its enforcement. I think we clearly saw how the Electoral Commission of Zambia at some point suspended campaigns for political parties, even the ruling party, as well as the opposition, where violence or hate speech was actually demonstrated. Is it something that ZEC can also pick up from, can learn from in terms of enforcement of the code of conduct?
Yes, clearly that is a very good lesson. We do have a code of conduct currently, but there are no sanctions or enforcement mechanisms. It's just more of a consensus document where political parties come in and agree that this is what we should not do, but it doesn't go further to say what kind of sanctions should happen should they not do that. So clearly the Zambian situation, which we've also seen happening in Tanzania and some other such countries, where a political party that breaks the code of conduct will get some sanctions, is something that we should take on board. But for us to be able to do that, as a country, it might be important to really have an organic legal definition of what constitutes a political party, maybe by also ensuring that they are registered, because currently we don't have any registration of political parties. You just group yourselves and then write to the commission that we are such an organization, and then you are just allowed to exist without registration. And therefore, the code of conduct, together with registration of political parties, could come in hand to ensure that we have some bit of sanity in terms of how political parties behave. You know, especially towards the way the commission itself is treated. We have a tragic situation where some political parties want to use the commission as part of their election manifesto, where instead of addressing issues that they could have addressed in parliament in terms of changing of electoral laws, they want to come out and bash the commission for what they will have failed to achieve in parliament. What is desired, in my view, to ensure that we have a stable political environment in elections is that the political parties must take it as a form of an early exercise, that they push for electoral reforms in parliament so that whatever happens, the commission is there just to implement whatever has been agreed. Not for them to go to parliament, fail to achieve whatever electoral laws that they want to change, and then they come here and bash the commission and say the commission is not playing according to the rules. The job of the commission is cut for it in the Constitution and Electoral Act, and as long as we play according to the defined rules of the game, surely the commission should be given the kind of respect that it should have.
Well, thank you so much. I'm pretty sure there might be quite a lot of interesting questions that are coming in from the members of the audience. Unfortunately, I understand you have to dash off, but it was a pleasure having you here and also to respond to issues. But if you still have a bit of time, we can still take one or two questions from the members of the audience that would also like to hear from the commission. It's an opportunity like this that we would like to also exploit. It's not every day that we get the commission to be coming in and speaking at a platform such as this, and would like to thank you so much for taking your time in doing so. I will move on, but I'm hopefully that maybe you might be still around for the next 15 minutes or so, and then I'll try and get one or two questions from the members of the audience that might be directed at you. But I'll continue, okay, and then I'll pick up the questions. Thank you so much again for being here. I would like to move to Roswitha Katsande, and I would like to start maybe with a tweet that I found very interesting, that I would like to share. Let me see if I can get technology here working. Can the host give me the host rights so that I can post something? Site. Well, thank you so much. Okay, I hope you can all see this tweet. Roswitha, you can see it. If you can see it, yeah. You can see it. Now, this was a post, I think, that came in from a young man today. I saw it on Twitter. And he was just reflecting on the past election result in Zambia. And he says that it shows that the youth have now arrived in contributing in serious life matters. Things change and time evolves. It's a very, very profound post. And I found it very relevant to the discussion today. And my question to you is, what do you think is the role of youth in elections in Zambia played? I think there was quite a lot of discussion around the participation of youth, especially during voter registration. And what can our youth on both sides of the political divide in Zimbabwe learn from the elections in Zambia and the participations of youth? If you can maybe respond to that, and then I can add as we go.
Thank you, Taona. I'm very excited to be part of this dialogue where we want to dissect in terms of what are the valuable lessons that may be adopted for consideration by Zimbabwean stakeholders to inform the ongoing efforts to improve the quality of electoral processes in the country. So when you shared this tweet, I think for me it's very interesting because it also shows that young people do have a major role to play when it comes to electoral processes. And I think events that also happened in Zambia, I think as a country, we can be able to draw lessons from that situation. So firstly, I just want to highlight that one of the lessons that came out of the Zimbabwean context is that mobilizing voters to register and vote in their numbers can assist in clearly determining winners in election and also consequently support acceptance to election results by those who would have lost. And if you look at the statistics, I think they indicated that 54% of the registered voters were young people under the age of 35. And I think that also shows you that young people in Zambia did a lot of work in terms of mobilizing young people to register to vote, mobilizing young people to vote on the election day. And I was also part of the ZESNI election observation mission in Zambia, where we were able to move around Lusaka and observe elections in some of the wards, polling stations in Lusaka. And I think it came out clear that there was a huge voter turnout, lots of young people, women, they came out in their numbers to vote on the 12th of August, which I think is something that we can also learn as stakeholders here in Zimbabwe to then say, how do we also organize, mobilize young people to register to vote? How can we also ensure that young people vote on the election day? I want to also maybe responding to what the commissioner said earlier on. I think in 2018, we had a slight improvement in the number of young people that registered to vote and that also voted during the election. But I feel there's still room for us to do more so that we can have more young people registering to vote. We can have young people voting during an election. And I think it's important that we also try to see how we can also address some of the barriers that young people currently face when it comes to voter registration. We have challenges around young people accessing documentation that is required for them to register to vote. We also have issues in terms of lack of decentralization of the registration centers where young people can go to register to vote. So I think if we are really committed in ensuring that young people play an effective role in electoral processes, we need to also ensure that we address these barriers. We also create a conducive environment where young people can be able to play a role when it comes to electoral processes. The other point that I also want to highlight is that when you also look at the Zambian case study, and something that we can also leverage or learn from is the role of social media. How young people were able to use social media to organize, for young people to mobilize young people to register to vote. And I also want to also emphasize that the experience of the Zambian young people also showed that they were ready and they were committed to go out to exercise their democratic right voluntarily, and they were also even prepared to defend the vote. In such instances, there were young people were even following the processes even up to the announcement of the results. So I think we really need to also make sure that we work on ensuring that, one, we address the barriers that young people are currently facing so that we have more young people registering to vote. We also have to also ensure that we also have a conducive environment that also promotes for youth participation in the electoral processes. And we need to also ensure that we have strong institutions that promote democracy. Because if you interact with a lot of young people, they also have concerns in terms of them they don't trust some of the institutions that are responsible for managing elections, like, for example, some of the challenges, the gaps with regards to our election management body, how sometimes the police or the military are used when it comes to elections. So I think we need to then ensure that we have that holistic approach where young people are able to register to vote, but also the environment should also be conducive for them to participate, and also ensure that the election, there is transparency in terms of the voting process, and finally, up until the election results are announced. Thank you.
But Rosita, I think the biggest challenge, and I think you actually nailed it, the environment. I think the youth in Zambia were also facing the same environment that we are talking about, but they managed to overcome those impediments that were in their way to turn out to register to vote, to turn out on election day to vote. What were the strategies that worked for the youth in Zambia that allowed them to kind of like be mobilized in such large numbers? Is it something that we can do? What is it that we are failing to do in terms of just getting out the youth to go and vote, to register in the first instance? I mean, I was looking at the statistics from ZEC. It's quite disappointing in terms of the numbers of young people that are turning out to register to vote, despite the campaigns, the spirited campaigns that we are seeing. It's either maybe ZEC is not telling the truth, or the youth are not just simply turning out. So what can we do in terms of ensuring that we get them out to go and vote? Because that is the vote that is required in terms of ensuring that either we retain a government or we change a government.
Thank you. So I think that we need to also do more work in terms of ensuring that we have young people in Zimbabwe who are politically conscious, who are able to analyze and be able to understand, the current situation in terms of the challenges that they are facing, and even to understand the political processes. What does it mean when you talk of elections? How, if they participate in electoral processes or if they vote, how is that going to bring change or change in terms of the situation that they are in? So I also feel that is civil society, political parties, and other stakeholders. We also need to see how we can also make improvements to also ensure that when we do this youth voter mobilization campaigns, we also try to also make sure that we reach out to young people using the language that also resonate with their lived realities. You are right to say when Zambia went to elections, young people were facing challenges, for example, unemployment, and a lot of young people wanted to see a response to the increase in social and economic hardships. So I think the messaging should also resonate to what the young people are currently facing, so that we can be able to motivate them to participate. But I think the issue of then the motivation can then be addressed if we have young people who are politically conscious, who understand the importance of them participating in electoral processes, and even to say, after voting, you also still have a role to play in terms of bringing the elected leaders to account, so that there is increased transparency and accountability. And I also think voter registration, when we talk of young people, it should also be, we should also use the multi-pronged approach. How to also utilize social media, where we find a lot of young people, so that they also participate, they also register to vote. But I think at the same time, it's good to use social media, but how then do we even reach out to other young people who are in, for example, rural areas, in other communities who may not be, who may not have access to social media? Then the other point that I also wanted to raise is that we also need to ensure that young people are very clear in terms of the vision that they want to see for the country. If you look at the Zambian case, that I think a lot of young people went out in their numbers to vote because this desire to end unemployment. But with the current situation that we have, I think, how then do we best work around, sensitizing young people around the role that they can play to change the current situation? And I also think, when it comes to exercising your democratic rights, it has to be voluntary. So I think we need to make sure that there's that political consciousness and using a holistic approach so that we have more young people registering to vote. But at the same time, we also need to ensure that we have institutions, policymakers that are also responsive to youth issues, because often at times young people then want to question to say, why do we continuously vote if you are not seeing a change, or if you are not seeing any improvement in terms of our livelihoods? Thank you.
Thank you so much. You raise a very interesting aspect, and I would like to go to this slide, and maybe just to get your thinking into this. I found it very, sorry, now let me, I found it very interesting, because then I think it also speaks to a issue-based campaign that went right. Is it something maybe that you can agree on in terms of how do we sensitize? Are we just going to tell them to go and register? I think it's a question that we then need to have a message that resonates with the youth. What do you see in this picture that relates to youth?
Thank you for sharing that picture. And I think I agree with you that it really speaks to young people to then say, when we reach out and even when you talk of elections, when campaigns are done, they also have to speak to certain issues that really affect young people. Because I think what that message is also implying is then to say, as a young person, if you want to vote or decide which candidate to vote for, you want to ensure that you vote for someone who's speaking or resonating in terms of how they are going to transform the current challenges that you are facing as a young people. And also, I look at this being also important in then also ensuring that young people can also be able to hold the leaders accountable to then say, you promised us jobs, for example, where are we? So I think it really resonates with young people, but I think we need, like you said, we need to really work more around the messaging, so that it's also appealing. We speak to the lived realities of young people as we talk of participation in electoral processes.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll get back to that as we go into the discussion. But in the meantime, I would like to welcome Her Eminence, Bishop Mary Nkosi. She was not in when we did the initial introduction. She's a holder of a postgraduate diploma in management studies from Polytechnic of Central London, and also holds a Bachelor of Science, Biology, Psychology from the University of Malawi. She worked as the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Malawi in 2003 to 2013, and between 1995 and 2003, she worked with FinCon, which is Nedbank, rising to the position of Chief Executive Officer. Currently, she's serving as a board member of G4 Security Services. She's also a board member of FDH Bank, a board member of World Vision Malawi, and COMESA Committee of Elders. She's also ordained as a pastor of the Living Waters Church in 2001, and later as a bishop in 2013. Welcome, Bishop, to this discussion. I'm going to go for you, but before I do that, I would like to encourage members of the audience, if you have any questions, to post them on the chat, which I think will open in the next 5 minutes. And we can then pick up those questions and address them to the specific members of the panel that would you would like to respond to those issues. And I would like members of CITEZW to help me. If you see any questions that are related to the commissioner, please do flag me so that I can then have them addressed before he leaves us. I think there's quite a lot of appetite in terms of interrogating the lessons that Zach learned from Zambia. Now, Bishop, do I hear you?
Hello, I can hear you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop. Now, my question, Bishop, I think I'm going to be reading from an article that was published by Sishua and Nick Cheeseman in an article titled "The 3 Lessons for Africa from Zambia's Landslide Opposition Victory, published in the African Documents. They had this to say: ahead of elections, nearly all Zambia's key economic indicators were extremely poor. Unemployment was high and particularly acute among the youth, one of the groups that helped swing the outcome of HH's favor. Corruption was endemic, inflation was in the double digits, and high cost of living left about 40% of the Zambians unable to eat a normal meal. The staggering external debt was around 12 billion and up to 1.9 billion in 2011. They took all the money away from social services, while service delivery was so poor that sporadic protests flared up in urban centers. Now, this is the context, the economic context that Zambia went into the election with. Now, my question to you is, could this have been a factor in HH's victory and not his political strategy? If it is not, how did he exploit the situation to gain advantage? Bishop.
I think my observation is that this economic and social conditions obviously have prevailed in Zambia, but I'm looking at the campaign promises, the manifesto of the party or the alliance where HH was leading, that he targeted quite a lot the youth. And that's why the voter turnout from the sector of the youth was really high. And corruption has been a major issue, I am told, reliably informed when I was in Zambia, that its rate of corruption was pretty high. And therefore, those that are willing to see development in Zambia wanted to get out of this situation of corruption. And I think it does contribute to the high turnout of voters. I was there. It was amazing to see the queues and the youth and the women lining up to vote for, most of them, the current president, the incumbent. Thank you.
So in your analysis of the issues in Zambia, would you say that the economic environment contributed to the success of the election for HH? Was this a protest result, or was it a result that reflected the campaign strategy of HH in terms of what he is promising to do to the economy? Or was it a protest vote that was actually geared in terms of saying, no, President Lungu, you have mismanaged the economy, so we have no option but to take you out?
I think from observation, one could say it's a combination of protest as well as the campaign strategy that HH deployed. It remains to be seen what comes after this, the swearing in, because people are too quick to judge soon after a leader has taken over. They want to see change almost immediately. And so I think HH has a tall order, but if he sticks to this campaign manifesto, he should do well.
Okay, thank you so much, Bishop. I'll come back to you as we go into the discussion for now, and then maybe kind of like take the key issues that led to this victory for HH. I would like to now move on to the media, but now can I advise members of the audience that the chat room is open? You can post your question. I will also open up later on for voice questions that are directed at members of the panel. So please bear with us as we go. I would like members of CITE that are helping us with the technical aspects of it to pick up key pertinent questions and feed them onto the WhatsApp chat so that at least I can see them as we go into the discussion. Mr. Machazi, good afternoon. You were not in when I did the introductions, but would like to welcome you to this debate, and also for you to be sharing your experiences, given the fact that you were also in Zambia And you did play a very significant role in terms of providing oversight to the electoral process, specifically as it relates to the media. Now, one of the things that came out of the EU preliminary reports is that they noted that the traditional and online media campaign was highly monetized, with the ruling party monopolizing the prime time on state and private media. Disinformation and tribalism pervaded online debate to the detriment of the voters. Campaign coverage on traditional media was primarily paid for by the parties. The state-run broadcaster reported on all official visits by the president and vice president, providing the PF with overwhelming campaign media coverage. But on the other hand, also, private media coverage did not remedy the overall imbalances between the between the Election Observation Mission preliminary statement, as it indicated. Time allocated to the ruling party in the private media was low, and other contenders, even of those broadcasters, were given high exposure to a few prominent opposition leaders. So overall, the ruling party monopolized the prime time of the state and the private media. Now, given this, and given the nature of the media and the closed space that you observed and other people observed in Zambia, what lessons can we learn from Zambia in terms of the use of the media, and more importantly also how the media conducted itself in the build-up to the elections and post-elections in Zambia?
The question is to me, I hope.
Yes, it is to you, sir.
Okay. All right, great. All right, thank you so much for that question. At the beginning, we spoke about context and said probably because Zimbabwe has got a different context from Zambia, some of the things can't replicate each other. But when it comes to the media particularly, I think Zimbabwe and Zambia are literally twins because of the way the media is governed and the way in the run-up to the elections it was. As you say it rightfully, public media was literally state media, was literally a party broadcaster. If you look at ZNPC particularly, they literally airbrushed Hichilema from the campaigns. It was as if there was nothing going on. They would only write about him when something negative is going on. So in that context, I looked and saw it was the same as ZBC. It was the same as Herald. If you look at, is it the Daily Mail and the Times? So in that context, we have a lot in common with Zambia. We are working in an environment where there's lots of polarization. The only difference is that Zambia, if I'm not mistaken, has got 45 radio or TV stations. So there's a bit of plurality, but most of those stations not well off. They are struggling. So at the end of the day, they rely on ZNPC for their news. So the ZNPC news gets replicated a lot throughout the country, and it's prejudicial to the other candidates that were in the election. Speaking of which, I found a very interesting, probably most of you are familiar with this, but I found it very interesting that when Lungu came into power, he literally took journalists from Daily Mail and put them in ambassador positions and put them in government positions, which is quite interesting because it shows just how far much the media is embedded with the ruling party in Zambia. Another thing that we found a bit interesting is that just like Zimbabwe, the media, I think, is during the elections, ZEC here in Zimbabwe is supposed to have an oversight role of the media, but they don't do anything about it. Public media continues campaigning for the ruling party. Private media, well, they don't have much of an obligation to write about anyone, but it feeds into that polarity. So the ZEC here is supposed to have an oversight role, and the Electoral Commission of Zambia as well is supposed to have an oversight role of the media, but they don't have teeth to enforce that. So Daily Mail, The Times, and ZNPC continued acting like they were spokespersons for Lungu during the election, and everyone else was shut out. What we saw also, which is quite similar to Zimbabwe, is that the number of media violations, that is attacks on journalism, attacks on media workers, also spiraled towards the election. I think there was at campaign rallies, I think people were beaten up, radio stations were bombed, journalists were caught in the crossfires as people fought, as political parties fought. So in that context, Zimbabwe and Zambia are really, really the same in terms of how they handle the media. And also, before we went there, we realized that Zambia has not been doing too well in terms of freedom of expression, and has been on the decline during Lungu's time. I think a famous example is the closure of Prime Media, which, well, no radio or TV station has been closed here in Zimbabwe for a while. The last one was, I think, was the Daily News as a newspaper. But what we saw is that the government used that in terms of it's sort of like a stick to say, if you report in a way that we don't like or which we don't appreciate, there's a risk that your newspaper or your broadcasting station could be closed. So the media environment there is very, very polarized. I don't know if it can be held in a very short space of time, as promised by the president who's coming. While there's plurality, the media, I think, is also weak in terms of resourcing. As more people, as more stations and newspapers are struggling. There was the mention of, I think it was Arnold Sunga was speaking earlier about diggers of Zambia, news diggers of Zambia. They are doing a sterling job. Bloggers of Zambia, they're doing a sterling job, but they are really small compared to if you compare them to the Daily Mail or if you compare them to the Times. So there is no plurality in terms of reach, and that's something that the new president, who seems to be media friendly for now, he has promised to do. I'm not being skeptical by saying he seems to be media friendly for now, because if you look at Edgar Lungu himself, before he became president, he used to write model laws for the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Zambia chapter. So I'm not being too skeptical, I hope, about the future of the media there. And I think going forward, ECZ should be given teeth in the way they monitor elections. They've displayed a bit of independence in the way they handle this election. But in terms of regulating the media, there's need for the ECZ to be strong and to be given teeth. And also, there are bills that Lungu must, HH must deal with when he comes into power. I think one of them that has been outstanding for a very long time is the access to information law, which Zambia is one of the few countries in the region that doesn't have one, including Botswana. I think even Zimbabwe has done better in that regard because we have the Freedom of Information Act. I think also there's need for the repeal of the Cybersecurity Act, which was gazetted a few days ago, because it has a chilling effect on press freedom and freedom of expression in Zambia. I think for now I can leave it here.
Thank you so much. I think there were also issues around self-regulation in Zambia, and there was, I think, quite a lot of discussion in the build-up to the elections in terms of how the media houses could self-regulate, and how did this play out in the Zambian elections?
Well, I think what the media houses are looking at is sort of like a framework that that promotes self-regulation. But by and large, Zambia, unlike Zimbabwe, doesn't have, let's say, a commission like the Zimbabwe Media Commission, where every journalist has to be registered. By and large, Zambian media is self-regulated. But I think what they want is a law that speaks to self-regulation rather than something that is just left to the industry to go out like that. I think even working with an environment like Zimbabwe, I need to compare with Zimbabwe, because right now we are campaigning for self-regulation of the media. The government doesn't want that, and now we are moving towards co-regulation, which the government is stalling on. But in Zambia, they don't have all this legal environment that tells them what to do and when to be registered. So I think instead of really it being something regulatory, it's more just a framework so that everyone can understand where they are in terms of media freedom and journalists being allowed to do their jobs.
Okay, quite interesting as well. But I mean, you also noted in your discussion that the media environment, particularly access to the traditional media platforms, such as the national broadcaster, were kind of like out of bounds for the opposition parties. How did the UPNB, in your kind of like observation, manage to bypass this and get the message across? What platforms did they use, and how did they manage to do so?
I think one of the things that the UPND did really well in terms of reach was the use of social media. I think for a while, HH was being accused of being an online candidate because particularly the use of Twitter and Facebook and blogging was very big in their campaign. And for the independent, the few independent media that are there, that are really independent, they did put a lot of spotlight on the president. While traditional media has a strong hold, particularly across the country, really, in urban areas, you will find that social media was very, very powerful as a tool for communication. One of Lungu's strongholds, at least according to my understanding when I was there in Zambia, was Lusaka. Lusaka, I think, in the last election, he got 80% of votes in the city. But when it comes to this election, he fell very badly in Lusaka, and this is a place where the use of social media is important, the use of Twitter, Facebook, etc. And a new medium which is very, well, we can't call it new as such, but which is very effective in terms of communication was WhatsApp. So that's a very easy way of bypassing traditional media. I think while traditional media will always be important, I think what is happening in social media is that it's breaking the bounds, it's breaking the limits. I want to give an example for here in Zimbabwe. Just a few days ago, South African opposition, Mmusi Maimane, held a Twitter space, and in it there was the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa. And on that day, Mmusi Maimane got a record number of hits on his space, a record number of participants. There was about 5,000. So those are figures which I can put my hand on my chest and swear that Herald is not selling that much. Newsday is not selling that much. Daily News is not selling that much. So there is a scope to bypass all these barriers that are put in by the government in terms of access to the media.
No, quite interesting. I think some of your media practitioners might not agree with you. I mean, let me put up this tweet.
They will lynch me.
Let me put up this tweet from some of your colleagues. This was a discussion today that I saw on Twitter. I think it was Stanley Gama, who posted that, guys in the media fraternity, let's hold an indaba to save our industry and come up with a way forward. Most media houses have frighteningly been captured. We need a way forward urgently. And I think Dumisani, responding to another tweet, he says that that's ridiculous. Citizen journalism can never replace professional journalism. Journalism is a science of verification, not just posting things arbitrarily and at leisure. So I find it quite interesting that you found social media to be very effective, and that there it is put out in terms of some of our senior journalists. We're not necessarily saying it's not effective, but also questioning its ability to be able to be a viable media as an alternative media in an environment that is closed. I mean, I just wanted to get your thinking into that as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I didn't get involved in it, but I see my name is tagged in that tweet. Well, what I think it's not just about, I don't want to put it in a context of citizen journalism versus professional journalism. But if you look at probably some of the biggest accounts here in Zimbabwe in terms of Twitter, some of the biggest are really journalists. So if I'm going to post something on Twitter, I know that maybe 20,000 people are going to see it. And this is verified information. That's a news story that is verified and has been checked, and I post it. And also what happens a lot is that some people who are not even on Twitter will screen grab these stories or articles that we post online, and they are shared with, they're shared on WhatsApp, they're shared on Facebook, and this has got it replicates so many times. And at the end of the day, even verified information verified information is received by more people, hundreds of thousands of people. If you look at Twitter, for example, or even Facebook, you have a direct line, so to speak, to a government official or to an opposition official, and there is no intermediary. That is journalism. That is journalists in getting the news forward. Another thing is the type of journalism that we have in Zimbabwe at the moment, because of the economic situation, many senior journalists are leaving the profession, which is weakening it a lot. And even those that are there, because of the economic situation, they can't afford newspapers. I'm not going to be blasting my colleagues in the media fraternity, but even if we were to ask the audience here, very few bought a newspaper today. They're going to read stories based on referrals from Twitter or WhatsApp or Facebook. So at the end of the day, social media is becoming a central player in terms of how we receive and impart information, and is bypassing traditional media. Just to wrap up on the answer of that, I think there's really need to strengthen traditional media, and both even in Zimbabwe and Zambia, because not to say it's going to be irrelevant, but it's no longer your first source of news. Most of the time, the stories I read, and I think I read a bit of news, most of the time the stories I read are posted by my friends on WhatsApp or on Twitter, or the people I follow. So I can spend the whole day without touching Daily News or Newsday or Herald or whatever, and feel I'm pretty informed because X posted a story from Newsday, which I found interesting. B posted a story from Daily News, which I found interesting. So in that way, traditional media is losing its place. It's an important player. It has to be safeguarded, but at this rate, it's losing its place in terms of being the agenda setter of news.
Thank you so much. I think I enjoyed that kind of discussion. I think it also brings in quite a lot of issues in terms of how we can be able to look at alternative sources of information, given the fact that our space in Zimbabwe seems to be closed. And one of the things that I enjoyed working in Zambia was the fact that they had quite a lot of community radio stations, I think close to about 100 or so community radio stations that were slightly operating independent from the main media houses. But I think we also saw efforts to close those when the opposition went in to try and address some local institutions in those areas. But I'll get back to you on that one. I think it's a very interesting discussion. I would like to go to Stabile Dewa. Are you there, my sister?
I actually thought you'd forgotten about me.
No, I'll never forget about you.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Okay, so I try to kind of give context to my questions, and I'm hoping that I won't be leading the discussion to that extent. But I would like to kind of try to look at figures, and then from there on try to get your thinking into it in terms of what worked or what did not work in Zambia, and what we can possibly do. One of the things that I also noted is that Zambia had, I think, close to 7 million, close to 7 million certified voters, which was also representing close to about 83.2% of the eligible voters. But interestingly, women represented about 53.4% of the registered voters, whilst men were constituting close to about 46.6%. But despite this massive registration of women, participation in the electoral process as candidates by women in Zambia, for instance, was only about, I think, 6%, 21%, and 12% in the presidential, parliamentary, and council chairperson elections separately, which was a worrying trend. And since we are now looking at best practice and lessons learned, we also noted that out of the 155 contested parliamentary seats, only 20 were directly elected. Women were directly elected. Now, what were the issues in Zambia? What contributed to the low uptake of women participation in elections? Not only in elections, but also in political processes. And what can be done to encourage political parties to adopt more women to contest in election as we build up into the Zimbabwean elections.
Thank you very much, Taona, and thank you to the organizers of this important initiative. I want to start by saluting and congratulating the women in Zambia who constituted 53% of the total number of votes who actually determined the 2021 national elections. There's been a lot of talk around how youth came out in their numbers, forgetting the women who evidently surpassed the 50% mark, and amongst the youth that are being referred to are also young women who braved the queues, the intimidation and harassment to cast their votes. To come to your question, I had the privilege to also travel to Zambia as part of a learning observation mission in partnership with the Elections Resource Center and the Southern African Human Rights Defenders Network. And there were a lot of things that we learned as an institution as we prepare towards 2023. But just top level issues, one thing that I noticed with the Zambian electoral process is one, it is similar with the Zimbabwean one, which is the first past the post, the winner take all. So it is quite difficult to achieve gender balance using the first past the post. That's the reason why you see countries like Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa have moved from the first past the post to the proportional representation, where political parties, where people, instead of voting for individuals, they do vote for political parties, which are mandated to submit list of candidates from the lowest level, the council, the MPs, that are gender balanced. So as long as Zambia does not think around changing the electoral system, together with Zimbabwe, will continuously record lower numbers of women in leadership positions. The second layer is the Zambian constitution is not explicit in terms of guaranteeing gender parity. The Zimbabwean one is actually a bit more advanced, where we have clear constitutional provisions, section 1756 and 8, that clearly stipulates the need for different stakeholders in Zimbabwe as a nation to fulfill gender balance and equality in all leadership positions. The Zambian constitution is only in Article 45, which was an amendment that speaks to issues of gender equality, but there is no, the how part, there is no time frame as to how that should be done, and there are no penalties for political parties who fail to achieve that. So there's really more that needs to be done in order for them to move towards gender equality. I also noticed that amongst the presidential candidates, there were 16 presidential candidates, only one was a female candidate. And comparing to Zimbabwe, we are actually ahead, because the last election we had, in terms of quantity, just 5 women who ran for presidents, though they failed to garner, all of them combined, they fell to garner 5%, which means there's still more that we need to do. And I also noticed that the reason why in Zimbabwe we are talking of about 35 to 36% gender representation in parliament is because of the women's quota system that was introduced in Zimbabwe. And comparing with Zambia, they don't have that provision, which then results in less than 15% total on average of women making it into leadership positions. Though ours, we have the quota system and we have the 30%, we still have a long way to go to 50%. That's why as the women's movement, we are advocating for the full implementation of gender equality provisions within the constitution that then guarantee gender equality, not only in parliament, but also at council level and also presidium. I also want to speak to the issue of running mates. I noticed that Zambia have a provision for running mates, which then allowed 5 political parties to field female running mates. And that automatically led to Zambia having a female vice president, Honorable Mutare, Mtale, Nalu, Mango. And I feel that maybe Zimbabwe, if we had maintained the running mate clause, maybe political parties would have felt the obligation to make sure that women are equally represented at that level. So in terms of the environment, like what other speakers have mentioned, there was a lot of unlevel playing field, intimidation, harassment. And I was also privileged to meet some of the political parties, including the now Vice President, Honorable Nalumango, who, when she also bemoaned the issue of intimidation, harassment, and lack of representation of women. And she promised that if she is elected the Vice President of Zambia, she will pursue the issue of gender equality. And I hope Zambians will be able to pursue and hold her to account. But I'm glad that the operating environment didn't curtail women from coming out to vote in their numbers. I also had an opportunity to go in and out of Lusaka on election day, and I could see there was consensus amongst the voters where they would allow women with babies, older women, to get in front, and that also promoted an environment that is favorable for women to also cast their vote. So I think besides the constitutional provisions and electoral system in Zambia, the intimidation that followed and the harassment that came with this electoral cycle kind of like intimidated women. And it was not only inter-party or state-sponsored, it was also within political parties during the primary election. So I feel there's a lot that needs to be done in Zambia for them to move towards parity. Thank you.
I mean, interesting that you brought in the aspect of political parties. And I think my next question would be, what kind of lessons do political parties in Zimbabwe can learn from the Zambian elections, particularly where it comes to strategy and planning and ensuring that they get the vote? I mean, I would like to go to this headline in the Daily News. This was in the Daily News the other time. Okay, there it goes. Zambian elections expose the MDC. I mean, it speaks quite a lot in terms of how political parties are perceived going into this election. But I would like to get your thinking in terms of the expectations that we have on political parties and what political parties can be able to do based on what Zambia did in order to kind of like get the field ready for the elections, but also even to win elections. And what is it that is lacking? What is it that the Zambians did well that we deserve such a headline in the Daily News?
Okay, what I learned from the Zambian election is that an election is not an event, it is a process. President Hakainde Hichilema had tried to contest for more than 5 times and losing, but the stakes were so high for him that he had to prepare. So there's no substitution for mobilization, preparing, and strategy. What I've seen in Zimbabwe, the slogans, the fair, chete, those are not strategies. We need to move beyond the bemoaning of the environment to actually come up with clear strategies. In Zambia, there were 12,000 polling stations, and the UPND deployed 20,000 electoral agents. This is more like almost 98 or 99% of the polling stations for the opposition in Zambia had 2 people who were specifically there to protect the vote. So there is an enormous responsibility upon the Zimbabwean political parties to take it upon themselves to start planning. I actually think that they should actually be halfway through the planning process for the next elections. I've seen
but Dewa, in the last election, if you are going back to figures, actually the MDC had close to 98% of the polling stations covered, and I think ZANU-PF had 99% polling stations covered.
I don't think that is correct for the opposition in terms of the deployment. of polling agents. So I think it is actually something that they really have to work towards. I also got an opportunity to visit the CCMG, which was a church-led organization which was compiling information regarding the election results, the PVT. And there's this simple PVT model that they were using, which I thought that if political parties in Zimbabwe are really serious about running effective campaigns and elections, they really need to make sure that they customize the PVT to make sure that they have representation at all the polling stations in Zimbabwe and make sure that they collect evidence. Because the reason why that UPND came out confidently to question the results during the announcement of the results was because they had evidence. So as long as you do not have evidence, it is quite difficult for you to then question, and how do we move beyond the monetization of the electoral processes in Zimbabwe, where you feel that as a Zimbabwean, because this is not only the responsibility of political parties, but of Zimbabweans in general, because we all have a responsibility to play in making sure that we elect leaders that we feel will be able to push our agenda. So how do we as citizens make sure that on the election day, we go beyond just casting our votes? How do we separate the protection of the vote and the defending of the vote, with the civil society, political parties having the responsibility to protect the vote? What I witnessed in Zambia was they actually did both, where you actually had ordinary citizens being at the forefront of defending the vote. I remember when the two polling officials were killed, it was because there was evidence that came out of the polling station that someone tried to change the election results, and the information was conveyed to people who were in the queue, who then meted instant justice. Not that I'm condoning violence, but this is what happens when citizens are quite engaged and proactive, which I feel is actually lacking in Zimbabwe. And I think we also are coming to civil society. Elections are not only a prerequisite of ERCs, yes, we burden them with everything to do with elections. In Zambia, actually, it was the churches who were at the forefront of making sure that the elections are free, fair, and credible, and they had the evidence at the end. So what can we do collectively as Zimbabweans? Can't we meet as civil society, social grouping, do a mapping exercise of all the polling stations in Zimbabwe? Then we deploy our members, and we don't even need resources to be able to do that. So there's really a lot that needs to be done besides the political parties, but also us as citizens.
Well, I mean, interesting insights into that. I think we'll get back to that in terms of the role of political parties and their ability to protect the vote. And I think I remember in the build-up to 2018 elections, there was quite a lot of hype around let's protect the vote. And I think maybe it's the ability of getting the strategy of protecting the vote that went wrong, to the extent to which we did not manage. I would like to not go on the slippery floor, but we did not manage to get the V11s that were required in terms of supporting the petitions. At this stage, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open it up to the members of the audience that might have voice questions. We can take the first round of 5, and then we take another round of 5. Then I'll come back and then do the last round of questions for the panelists before we close. I see Eddie Ziera. And I'll take Eddie Ziera first, and then is there someone else would like to ask a voice question besides Eddie? So I think currently I have Eddie only. Okay, then I have Betty Mupasi. So I'll start with Eddie and then go to Betty. Eddie, you can go ahead. Eddie Ziera. Eddie, you can unmute. Oh, I think it's gone. Okay, Betty Mpasi, you can unmute. Yes,
okay,
you can go
thank
ahead.
you. Thank you, moderator. My question is directed to the ZEC commissioner. I just want to know if there is a provision in the electoral law or in the electoral act that provides for other political players other than the ruling party to air their campaign views through the state machinery, that could be radio or TV, to enhance their election campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can lower your hand. Marco, Shoko, you can go ahead and ask your question.
My question goes to the commissioner. I think we've got a commissioner there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Can we say an independent commission is a real independent commission? Second, what are they doing with the utterance of the president when he was addressing, I don't know the meeting, which meeting in Mutare, and also to the ZANU-PF commissar, Mr. Chinamasa, when he said that ZANU-PF party and the army are inseparable, considering that it's a threat to the citizens of Zimbabwe.
Thank you so much. You can lower your hand. Any other questions that I can take? You can mute. Okay. Any other question that I can take? Going once, going two, and going three. So I'll ask the commissioner if he's still available to respond to those two questions. Commissioner Kwibani?
Yes, I'm still around. Actually, I've decided to stay throughout so that I can protect our institution. I know there's a tendency to bash our institution because of misinformation. There are a number of issues that arose out of the presentations that were given out by a number of presenters that I picked out. But let me start by answering the questions that came up on whether there is a provision for other political parties other than the ruling party to have access to state media during election campaigns. Yes, there is a provision in terms of the Electoral Act, which says that all contesting political candidates for presidential elections are given equal time slots for them to present their manifestos. And that has been done religiously in the previous elections. All contesting presidential candidates have been given that space on the national broadcaster to air their manifesto. Even to an extent that some of the parties have actually failed to utilize the space that they were given, maybe because of lack of resources or lack of depth or lack of capacity to come in there. But the main parties have utilized that space. However, we have also observed as a commission that during election time, there is something that happens here in Zimbabwe and everywhere else in the world, where government officials sometimes will continue their government business during election period, and they get coverage, which coverage then is used as an advantage for their political campaigns. Inadvisable, that gives the ruling parties more space because their government officials will also come in as party officials and then come in as government officials in the state media. But there is space for all parties. The second question that has been asked is that can we say ZEC is independent? Yes, ZEC is independent. It's independent in terms of how it's constituted. It's independent in terms of its operations. It's independent in terms of how it conducts its business. It's independent from both the ruling party and independent from the opposition political parties, which is why both the ruling party and the opposition political parties view ZEC with suspicion, because both of them want to get a favorable position. But ZEC has stood this ground in terms of its job, because this job is carried for it in the Constitution and Electoral Act, and we have followed that to the letter without fear and without any favor. And then there are sentiments that we asked about. The president said what in Mtare. I think he said what happened in Zambia will not happen in Zimbabwe. I'm not sure why I should answer that question, or why the commission should answer that question. I'm sure that question can be best answered by the president. I'm sure you have got access to his Twitter account and Facebook page. He's very interactive. You can refer to him to answer that. And then finally, the issue of the inseparable nature of the army and the ruling party, and what that means in terms of electoral democracy in Zimbabwe. That's also another question that surely should not be directed at ZEC. Suffice to say that I think sometimes we have a lot of hypocrites in this country. The same people that today ask us about conflation of army and ruling party are the same people that in November 2017 were taking selfies with the army side by side. A few months later, that newly found love goes away. When it goes away, they come and blame ZEC. Surely that's not our business, how political parties relate with the other institutions. ZEC on its own has this mandate, which it has done very well. ZEC's job is cut for it. What goes on the ballot box is what we take out and count and we announce. And we announce at the polling station. We have got about 12,000 polling stations. In the last election, somebody said that the opposition had 98% coverage of polling agents. I think it was you, Moderate. In fact, that is far from the truth, Moderate. They had about 20-something% coverage of polling agents. If they did have coverage, they were going to be able to know that each and every result in each polling station was a representation of what came out of the polling boxes. You see, in Zimbabwe, it's very simple to collect election results. All you have to do is to deploy about 12,000 people in the polling stations, one in each polling station. Immediately after results are collected, we announce and we stick them outside. You just take those and you can do your collation and see who has won. Many countries in SADC don't do that. In fact, a number are learning from us. I said before that we have got a forum called Elections Commissions Forum. I'm very glad that we've got former commissioner in Malawi. I've been with in about 2 observer missions, where we learned a lot for our sister commissions. You will know that there is a lot of things that people learn from each commission. In fact, ZEC is one electoral commission that has been informing a lot of commissions. Malawi Electoral Commission has been learning a lot from us. They have been sending people to come and learn from us. That also includes many other commissions. We also go around. So
Commissioner, if I can come in, I think you raise a very interesting aspect. And it's something that everyone was so excited about in Zambia in relation to election management. And I think you are right. I mean, results are posted outside polling stations, and it's easy to harvest those results, and it's easy to tally those results. Now, how did ZEC end up announcing 3 presidential results if it's that easy?
Well, each election can have a margin of error in terms of collection, and this was a small percentage in terms of collection. Let me tell you how this came about. We have got 5 days in terms of the Constitution to announce election results. On day 1 after the election, already some of the parties who were agitated began to send out their supporters to come and demand election results and for us to come and announce results. They even sent some of their supporters to come and try to break into the HICC, which was the command center, during the time when we were receiving results and collecting. You will remember that immediately after that, then there were unfortunate incidents of 1 August 2018 where some of our citizens lost their lives during the protest. We had a shift of people that were doing the manual entry of election results into our system. We are unable to change them because already were the situation outside where people could not go in. Those people had to work 24 hours. You will see that some of errors that could have come in could have happened there. Those are common errors that were not really significant. Remember, in the last election, whereas the election was tied, the difference between the person who won, that's President Mnangagwa, and the second person was Mr. Chamisa. The difference between them was actually about 6 point something percent. And that's a huge margin, by the way. It can be defined as close. Somebody got 44%, somebody got over 50%. So there was that difference. So the difference was just minute, and we did acknowledge it, but it didn't have material effect in terms of changing the election.
Okay, so I think my point was also trying to amplify the challenges. If ZEC can't get the results correct, then also I think it also applies to political parties in terms of the challenges. ZEC has the ability to be able to get the results. I just wanted to highlight that.
Can I come in and say that in Zambia, if you are following tweets and Facebook by HH, he did post and say results from polling station data indicate they are encouraging. He never went out to announce the results. They never went out to put pressure on the Electoral Commission. One lesson that I think people can learn from Zambia and other countries is that there is need to give room to the Electoral Commission and other institutions to do their duty and do their job. Political parties must know what to do and what to do where. For instance, rules are changed in Parliament, and then the Commission implements it. Political parties must not make the Commission their enemy. They must make it an institution that they respect. There's no need to be mobilizing thousands and going to the Commission. It doesn't work. It's a lesson that I hope people have learned from last time, and I hope in the next election people will have cordial relations with the Commission. I'm saying this emphatically because I myself come from the position of opposition political parties into the Commission. And my term of office ends in the next 4 days. And I've sought not to renew my term in order to do other things. So I think what I'm saying is an observation. I do have, I could be appointed for the second term, but I've opted not to be reappointed. But so I'm saying that political parties must learn that the institution of ZEC is made up of men and women who are committed to ensuring that they do things right for the country. But political parties have made ZEC employees and ZEC as an institution an enemy of themselves. And as a result, they've donated ZEC to one political party. When ZEC is ready to do its job in terms of the constitution, you know, we need to move away from that. We need to ensure that we work with ZEC as an open mind. That's one thing. That's one takeaway that people can have from some of us who were in opposition, worked with ZEC, and are now leaving ZEC.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I will take 2 more questions. Moses Semwayo and Madiwa. I'll start with Moses Semwayo. You can ask your question.
Okay. Thank you, our moderator. My question goes to the Commissioner to say, I think even some of the terms to say we have got a command center, I think it can actually become a militarized word. Why can't the ZEC become as independent as it should be, so that when the results are being announced within a short space of time? Because if it end up taking 3, 4, 5 days, as well as having 3 or 4 announcements, that actually keeps or gives a lot of questions how these elections are being run in our country. And I think we should take a lot of lessons from our Zambian counterparts. Thank you.
So Moses, what was your question then? Was it a statement or you were asking a question?
Okay, I was asking to say, in the management of the election, why should some of the words like command center still be used? Because when it is command, it seems like it's a military word.
Okay, I got you. Thank you so much. Madiwa?
So, thank you, moderator. I'm Madiwa Charles, Director of Elections for MDC Alliance, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. I've got some 3 direct questions for the ZEC Commissioner. The first one being that he has indicated that there are 12,000 polling stations, and from the schedule I have from ZEC for the 2018 elections, there were 10,985 polling stations. So I would like him to clarify the disparity. That's question number 1. Then my second question is, there were a number of recommendations made by some elections observer missions during the 2018 elections, domestic observation missions, regional and international, and they made some recommendations. Some of the recommendations are just administrative in nature, which ZEC does not need any legislation to implement in order to improve our election management. And I want to ask how far ZEC has gone to implement those in order to improve our election management system. Then the last question is, at what point would ZEC consider engaging stakeholders in view of the fast approaching election, especially around key issues like the delimitation process? I personally had written to ZEC several times requesting stakeholder consultation on key electoral issues, but we continue to see ZEC just putting things in the media without even consulting the key stakeholders. So at what point would ZEC then consider to engage key stakeholders around key electoral issues in view of its questionable independence? I thank you.
I'm not sure whether it's time for me to answer now, moderator.
Oh, yes, you can. I was looking, sorry, I was muted. I was looking for Reverend Gibson to ask his question. Is he still around? Reverend Gibson? Okay, I think we have lost Reverend Gibson. So you can go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I will answer the questions in no particular order of the way they came in. I will start with what was submitted by Director of Elections for the MDC Alliance, Madiwa Charles. Charles, you are correct that we have 10,785 polling stations. 12,000 was an error. So there is no variance in that. It was my error there. The second thing that you asked about was the issue of stakeholder consultation. You asked at what stage will ZEC start consulting key stakeholders regarding the important electoral issues to do with the next elections. And you indicated that you have written to us already about that. ZEC has started engaging stakeholders in regards to the key issues of delimitation. I think in the last 2 months or so, we have been able to hold meetings with the civic society organizations. Some of you who have come to our meetings that were held in Dowendale, I can see that you are there in the platform. I'm sure you can confirm that we have held meetings with the civil society organizations, and the key issue of discussion was the issue of delimitation, and also some of the issues that came up as a result of observer reports and other processes that we need to improve in our elections. We have also held a meeting with the media stakeholders. We held that meeting somewhere in Chinoi, I think about 2 or so months ago. I can also see some people that were there in that meeting. We have held a meeting with the parliamentarians, the Portfolio Committee on Justice, consisting of parliamentarians from across the political divide. The 3 political parties that are in parliament were all represented. And we did have serious engagements in terms of the role of parliament in particular, in terms of what they should do to change electoral laws so that we are able to move on with ensuring that whatever we do, it's all encompassing in terms of the desires of our people. I'm sure, I remember, Mr. Madiwa, that your party did have some of its parliamentarians present in that meeting. I hope that they did give feedback to you regarding what was discussed. We have also held meetings with Chapter 12 institutions in the country in the same process. So we have been having engagement with various players, and we also are going at some stage to have meetings with political parties who are key stakeholders. In fact, as you speak now, we were having a commission meeting. I had to go out of the commission meeting to attend to this meeting. One of the key resolutions that came out of that meeting today, which will be communicated, is that effective from the 1st of September, the Commission is going to resuscitate multi-party liaison committees where we want to be engaging at the grassroots level from districts and also at the level of provinces with stakeholders, political parties, as well as civil society and other players regarding their contributions on how to improve our electoral process. We've also discussed...
Sorry, Commissioner. So yes. At national level, there's nothing like that?
No, we want to start at the district level, and then we go to the provincial level. Then eventually we'll go to the national level. You see, the multi-party liaison committees at national level kick in after proclamation of the election. And as such, you can't legally constitute them properly. But it's easy for us to create multi-party liaison committees at a lower level using whatever name that we can give them. this is to ensure that there is interaction by various stakeholders at the lower level, so that they can discuss, engage, insult each other at that level if need be, and then make up amongst themselves. Because our observation is that some of the electoral conflict that comes up at the election time are simmering small differences that can be dealt with at a community level if we allow people to engage much earlier. So the approach is what we are doing now. But we have also realized as a commission that there seems to be a high appetite for voter registration now. We have seen the hashtags that people are doing. And the commission is certainly going to ensure that of the COVID period, it will increase, its access to voter registration centers, so that we can have much higher and higher numbers registering. But I said in my earlier submission that in the last election, our voter turnout, our voter registration was massive. It was very, very high, one of the highest in the region ever. And secondly, our voter turnout in the last election was about 86.7%, probably one of the highest in the region in the recent years. All those things need to be acknowledged as a way of confidence in how we've been doing our business, because we've been able to reach out as much as possible to the lowest possible area to allow people to register and also to allow people to vote. And then the other question relates to the issue of recommendations that have been done by international and local bodies and regional bodies, in terms of improvement of ZEC processes. Some of the recommendations, already are taken on board in terms of stakeholder engagement. Some of the issues relate to the issues of improved voter education and so on and so forth. All those things are happening as you speak right now. Everything that came up, which is valuable, was taken on board. And then finally, there was the issue of why do we call ourselves where we are a command center? It is some kind of militaristic language. Well, I'm sure we can call it any other name. It won't make any difference. Maybe we can call it a collation center or a central center, if that makes people happy. But the issue is that command in our context has nothing to do with the military. It is about coordination. And when you have election issues, we give powers to our staff to have powers to command our staff in terms of what should be done, because there should be one line of command during that time. And then finally, issues to do with results. Good people, when we write and adopt our constitutions, they become a some embodiment of our values, and they engender all of us in terms of what we stand for. The constitution that you voted for overwhelmingly in 2013 is very clear that election results for presidential must be announced within 5 days. The reason why the drafters of the constitution arrived at that, it was because they understood our process and what needs to be done and the space that must be given to the election management organization. So let's not put pressure on ZEC to announce results in a shorter period, and then you end up blaming it for making calculation figures. Give them their 5 days, be patient. 5 days is not too long to wait for if you are to get things properly. If you want ZEC to announce much earlier, change the constitution and give it lesser time to do the results. But also remember that our results are announced immediately at polling stations. They begin to be announced at polling stations before they are transmitted to the command center. So it's not like within the 5 days ZEC is sitting and doing nothing. No, it's announcing, it's collecting, announcing, and then publicizing in the polling stations, such that if you really have a network of people, in all the 10,785 polling stations. You can have your data with you probably within 1 day of the elections.
Thank you so much.
I think I've exhausted the question.
Yeah, quite interesting as well. And I think there are quite a number of eagerly coming up questions as well in terms of how ZEC operates. But just out of interest, I mean, maybe most of our audience would also like to know what's the route that is taken for results to be transmitted from polling station to the National Tally Center? Legally, that is provided for.
The elections we count the results and then we publicize them in the polling stations, and then from there they are physically taken to the district command center or district collection center, where we then collect them and then announce results and declare the winner for the local government election. And then we take those results to the constituency command center, where we then collect them, put them together, and announce and declare winner for the parliamentary election. And then they are taken to the national command center, where we collect them and declare winner for the presidential election. You may want to know that
they don't go to a provincial center.
No, they go to the constituencies.
Okay, because I think from one of the
and then what I wanted to say was that at the national command center, before the commission announces those results, the chief election agents for the parties that are contesting are all allowed to come and verify the election results. They can go through each of them. In the last election, I remember I recall Mr. Jameson Timber and Mr. Morgan Komich representing Mr. Chamisa. They were there at the polling station, and then I think representing ZANU-PF at that time, I think it was the late General S.B. Moyo, if I'm not mistaken, and the other person, I can't remember it really. Those did put their polling agents. They began the process of verifying, and in the process, later on, Mr. Komich and Timber then pulled out of the process. You see, the rest is history. But our process...
I would like to acknowledge, I think, for the clarification, I think it's very important, because I think there have been quite a number of accusations in terms of the black box at provincial level that is not clearly defined within the law. And I think in some of the publications and the teaching that we saw of results transmission, there was another level that was added on to that was not necessarily provided for at law. And I think these are the issues that people are raising. But thank you for that, Commissioner. I think it really helps in terms of clarifying some of the issues. What I'll do, members of the audience, and thank you so much for the questions, and I think it really has helped in terms of casting the issues out and also kind of like reflecting on it. I'll go on the last round with our panelists, and then we will kind of like start to wind up the process. And to that end, my next question, I would like to sincerely apologize to Susan. We haven't forgotten you. I think, as you can see, there are quite a number of unfinished businesses in Zimbabwe that people are very thirsty to understand and also to get information on. But one thing that I would like to ask you, Susan, and I think this will be my final question to you, what was the role of civil society in Zambia in terms of ensuring, one, the oversight of the electoral process, but at the same time also ensuring that information goes out and people participate in the election? You can do that maybe within 2 minutes at most.
All right, thank you very much, Tawana. It's been a very enlightening discussion. I too have learned a lot from the Zimbabwean process. To answer your question, civil society played a very significant role in the sense that we had a number of organizations that did different things. So for instance, somebody talked about the church. I think it was STAR. the role that the church played, for example. They started observing the process from the very beginning, from the issuance of national IDs all the way to the end of the process, including doing a parallel vote tabulation. So that helped people have much more confidence in the process and also just keep tabs on what was going on. And then we had other organizations, women's organizations that created situation rooms. We had organizations that were working with female parliamentarians. We had organizations that were key in doing things like civic education, which is something that is very important. Going by the issues that are rising in the chat, I can see that the issue of civic education is something that needs to be thought about as Zimbabwe prepares for the next elections, because civic education played a critical role in being able to mobilize the number of people that turned out to vote, but also for them to vote the way they did. It wasn't just civil society that worked, it was artists, it was youths in the communities in rural areas who came up with the best songs that talked about the challenges that people were facing and why they should vote the PF out, for instance. So the use of art, music, in addition to things like social media, was a tool that civil society used a lot. I also want to say something, even though it's not part of your question, but since it's the last one, Taona, that, and I hope that the commissioner is around. I think one of the challenges that we observed in Zambia with the electoral management body was the fact that they perceived most of the inputs or the queries that civil society was putting across as an attack. It's very, very important for the EMB to always learn to take a step back and, forget about the background noise of the advocacy and lobbying that goes on to look at the issues that civil society raises. It can make a very big difference in instilling confidence. There were issues that I heard that talked about political parties. For me, one of the major questions I'd have is, what is the electoral management body, for example, doing to create a table where there can be more cohesion between the EMB and the political parties to resolve the disputes that they are facing, for example? So on the part of civil society, does civil society think about creating entities that work with political parties? Because for you to be able to get political parties to protect their votes and be able to deploy party agents across the country, they need training, and it's a lot of training. It costs a lot of money, and the structures themselves are quite complex. So one thing I'd encourage fellow civil society organizations in Zimbabwe is to say, find your common ground, try to work together, map out areas of commonality and see how best you can distribute your resources across the country to achieve what everyone is trying to achieve, the EMB, the political party, and the citizens, which is a better Zimbabwe at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Taona.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that input. Is Arnold still here? Arnold?
I'm here, my brother.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, Arnold, I would like to maybe position your question within the context of political party, but also understanding the context in which political parties operate in Zimbabwe. And I think there were parallels that were actually drawn in terms of the environment political parties were operating in Zambia and the environment that political parties are currently operating in Zimbabwe. I mean, for instance, the arbitrary applications of COVID-19 campaign regulations. You're also looking at the Public Order Act in Zambia being misused in terms of denying opposition parties space to campaign, the selective application of rules. I mean, quite a lot of things that come in terms of hindrance. But besides that, the UPND in Zambia triumphed. What is your message? What is your message to political parties in Zimbabwe in terms of trying to overcome, drawing lessons from Zambia to overcome some of those impediments in terms of campaigns or in terms of occupying that space that they require to gain power?
Thanks, Taona, and very good conversations from everyone. But ultimately, I think the message is that elections matter. democracy matters, and that accountability, ultimately electoral accountability, is important, because it is through that process that we can get citizens and people in Zimbabwe beginning to demand for accountable governance. So ultimately, I think people-centered governance, as well as the fact that the African Union instruments, the international instruments, the SADC principles and guidelines, all of them reinforce the fact that the authority to govern arises from the will of the people. So I think, notwithstanding the fact that there could be environmental obstacles, I think those obstacles themselves should not deter political parties, civil society, the youth, women from registering to vote, and ultimately saying that if we want peaceful transfer of power, if we want to hold our leaders to account in a peaceful and non-violent way, there's no other way of doing it other than through elections. And therefore, I think it can be done. I don't think it's an exclusive opportunity for Zambians alone. It's an opportunity for all of us, but we have to take our baby steps to get there. So this is why I'm very happy with the organizers to give an opportunity to ZEC to be able to understand that the perception that is out there is that it needs to fix itself. It needs to be more open and listen a bit more to political parties, to civil society, and open channels of dialogue, because ultimately perception is reality. And as long as they, as the referees, there is a perception that there is bias, then which means that they are part and parcel of the reason why our country will be not having enough stability and create momentum for development. So instead of defending, I would really encourage ZEC to already do what it has started doing. They demonstrated meeting with civil society, meeting with the media. They must also respond to what the political parties are saying, that we have to be given opportunities for frequent meetings and to then be able to put their ideas forward. Then on the passage of legislation, what I've always said about repressive legislation is that, you know, when you're in government and you find yourself passing repressive legislation and as an instrument to retain power, what often happens is that you forget that when you don't have power, you do not really want repressive legislation to be used against you. So I think the motive or the motivation or mode when you're passing law is, if I have no power and I need protection, I need justice, I need equality, will I be comfortable with this piece of legislation? And if it makes you uncomfortable, then don't pass that type of legislation. Now, Lungu is out of power. He has passed the cyber laws. He has been abusing state institutions and weaponizing the legal system. If HH, who is now in power, was to proceed to do that, which means we're going to see him in jail, we're going to see him and his supporters being chased after. And so I think we need a civic space that is compliant with international human rights standards, which is compliant with the Constitution. So on that basis, I really think that any act of repression and injustice to one in an injustice to everyone, and therefore civil society, pro-democracy movements, progressive elements within the governing parties must all rally to protect the Constitution, because it's a valuable Constitution, and that's what we all have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's kind of like valuable information, and also advice that can also go to political parties, because often enough, we have often hear political parties crying that the space is not being provided for them instead of seeking out that space. And I think that's what they did in Zambia, to try and seek out that space and ensure that participation is guaranteed. That would give them the right to also participate in elections to the extent to which they can gain power. Roswitha, I would like to maybe go to you as we wind up. Maybe in summary, you can kind of like give us what kind of like campaign strategy you thought really worked for Zambia, and maybe you can give out as advice to Zimbabwean youth that can replicate what happened in Zambia, and not necessarily on the basis of saying you would want to change government, but also for those that were in power, how they lost it, and what strategies they could also look at it in terms of having ensured that they retain that power. Roswitha?
Thank you, Taona. So my recommendations, if we are to develop a campaign strategy, is that I think we need to make sure, like what other previous speakers have highlighted, that when it comes to ensuring that we have more young people mobilized and participating in electoral processes, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and the work has to be done by different stakeholders. I'm looking at political parties, civil society organizations, churches, the family, among other stakeholders. So we also have to ensure that the campaign strategies are holistic and it's also inclusive. And I think one of the things that we may also need to be cognizant of as we develop the campaign strategies also to ensure that we do have diverse groups of young people. So we then have to make sure that the tools that we are going to develop and implement, they also speak to the realities of the different groups of young people, young women, students, young men, among others. And I think we need also to be able to identify where do we find young people so that we can also tap on those spaces to be able to reach out with the message for them to register and vote and participate in electoral process in peaceful ways. So I think it's very important that the campaign strategies is inclusive and also is holistic. And it also has to be informed by the lived realities of young people. Maybe I also thought I could also speak maybe to one or two issues. I think that has also been highlighted earlier on. But for me, the most important point that I want to firstly highlight is that I think what we've learned from Zambia is that it's possible for us to conduct elections in the middle of a serious pandemic. And I'm hoping, I know we've had response from ZEC around this issue, but for me, it's just to reiterate that ZEC can also draw lessons from Zambia in terms of how we can conduct elections during a pandemic. How can we also even prepare to conduct the overdue by-elections, the delimitation exercise, and also the 2023 general elections. So for me, it's also around what can we learn, and also ensuring that we are able to uphold democracy within the country. Then the other interesting finding from the Zambian context is that they were able to extend the right to vote to prisoners. So when we're in Zambia, we're able to monitor prisoners who were voting for the first time. So for me, it was also a very interesting development. And, you know, the Electoral Commission of Zambia, they also put in place mechanisms that included voter registration, voter education, and they also had polling stations within the prisons to facilitate that they vote. So it's something that is very interesting from the Zambian context. And what I'm also picking from this conversation is that we need to also have an electoral management body. We need to have a neutral and professional electoral management body to ensure that we have free and fair elections. We also have increased transparency, and that can also instill confidence on the part of the citizen. And lastly, just to also point out that civil society plays a key role in the electoral cycle. And I think it's also important that even within the current context, civil society players, they should not be viewed as competitors. We are here they are there to work as stakeholders to also complement the work of the electoral management body. I'm glad that we heard from the ZEC commissioner that they are also planning on these these committees so that we also have that engagement. And I think that can also help in instilling confidence in the electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you raise a very important point around youth voter registration. And I think one of the most innovative measures that the Electoral Commission of Zambia put in place was the ability for youth that were turning 18 just a few days before the election to be allowed to register, even though they were 17. And I think it's something that we might also need to look at, because quite a number of youth that turn 18 on election day are disenfranchised because they cannot register before they turn 18, and registration normally takes place before they turn 18. And I think it's a very important aspect that we might need to consider and advocate for as we engage ZEC, because it's a purely administrative decision that needs to be taken on that. Thank you. We go to media. Mr. Machazi, your final take on this, and your advice to Zimbabwean media, and how we can make it more palatable in terms of its coverage of elections and political parties, and also your advice in terms of political parties, how they can then be able to get the message out in a polarized media environment such as ours.
Okay, I want to start by one thing that Kobani said in his presentation, that according to the law, the media is giving everyone enough space in terms of presenting their manifestos. Well, I don't think an election is just about a manifesto. An election is, I think it was Tao who spoke, an election is not an event. It's a 5-year process. So right now, as we are seeing, ZANU-PF has got 99% of the coverage on TV, which means the opposition is already disabled. And now, not to go into that, it will start another debate, but looking into the Zambian example, before elections, I think it's 60 days, if I'm not mistaken, all ministers lose their jobs, literally. There is no minister during the election campaign period. So which means they cannot use their platforms or their government programs to campaign for their parties. So nobody gets, like what Kobani was saying, I think it's something that the opposition and the ruling party here in Zimbabwe could try and push for, that all executive members, probably except for the president, lose their posts so that they don't abuse the power of incumbency. When I was speaking earlier, I spoke about the importance of the internet in terms of being a vehicle for communication. I think the power of the internet, even the government is realizing it. That's why we have an internet shutdown in Zambia. I'm not very optimistic that we won't have our own, because the government has shown an appetite when there are political processes to shut down the internet. We saw it in July last year, where they throttled the internet. We saw it in January again, where they literally shut down the internet for days. So in terms, they see the power of the internet, as nascent as it is. They see that it's really a threat, and they are willing to shut it down. So this is something that, as civil society, is something that we should be thinking of. It's an eventuality that might happen. So while the internet is a very important tool, it's a very easy tool for the government to shut down. Then probably lessons for our media. Well, what was spoken earlier was that the Zambian election was based on policy issues. It was based on, I remember having a debate with this young guy who said, look, Lungu built a lot of roads. He put in so much infrastructure, but that is debt, which we have to pay in future. So we can't be celebrating that we are being plunged into debt more. So you could tell that it was an election that was driven on issues. Even someone who you think is too young understood the importance of issues. So I think it comes back to our media, that the media here as well has to start delving on issues. It's nice that, I know probably because of resources, they go for the easy story. But it's nice that you write about issues and what's going on. I think stories about Charamba saying Zivatengesi is very nice. It's titillating, but in reality, what do we have to say beyond that? So I think we have to delve into issues and make ourselves, as the media really, and make ourselves relevant. We need to sort of like, I'm trying to look for the better term, but we need to sort of like have a new contract and build trust with the public, because at this point, traditional media has lost lots of trust with the public. We are going for the easy stories, we're going for clickbait stories, because we are under pressure to sell, not to inform. But if we inform, I think we have chances of selling. Then finally, for political parties, whether ruling or opposition, I think, to be honest, while the media is an important player, social media also like I said earlier, removes that it removes that barrier. It removes an intermediary. It removes all sorts of things. It removes the framing, because newspapers are framed, and it gives a direct access to the public. So it's important for the opposition to see how they can use social media beyond the tweets and everything. Like, for example, the Spaces thing that I spoke about, Clubhouse that I spoke about, or even WhatsApp. For example, opposition are not allowed to have, you're not allowed to have a license, a radio license, unless you are, unless you get it from the government. But chances of you, if you're not aligned to the government, getting the radio licenses are close to nil. But nobody is stopping the opposition from using podcasts. No one is stopping them from using blogs and vlogs where they reach to the people. They can do sound bites. I hope I'm not consulting for them at the moment. They can do sound bites. They can do sound bites that they can share on WhatsApp. Small clips that they can share on Twitter or Facebook. You don't have to wait for the Herald. You don't have to wait for ZBC. There is so much that they can use. But at the end of the day, they have to remember that there is the risk that this will be shut down. But before it is shut down, they have so much opportunity to use these tools that are available, that are cheap. Well, they're not really cheap, but thanks to bundles and stuff, they have reduced the price that would be normally charged. I think with those words, thank you.
Thank you so much. Quite an enriching discussion. And I think those that have pens and notes have taken notes, and hopefully we'll see improved on that as well. Stabile. Stabile.
Yes.
The things on my heart and the pain on my heart, the ability of women to participate in electoral processes. And actually, we have seen an erosion in Southern Africa of the numbers of women that are nominated by political parties to participate in elections. And going into this election, I think we now also need to have strategies that can encourage, not necessarily encourage, because I think they are already encouraged, but opportunities that should be provided to political parties to nominate women. What are the strategies that we are looking at? What should we do in terms of encouraging more women participation in electoral processes, and also getting political parties to nominate women to stand in critical key positions? You mentioned the vice presidency in Zambia, and that's a very good takeaway from that election.
Thank you. I think it's high time that we link our votes to the electoral outcome through making sure that our vote comes with conditions. I think we need to get to a stage as women where we say we are not going to vote for political parties that do not respect gender equality, issues of gender balance. We really need to come together, because issues that are affecting women are not only affecting women in ZANU, MDC, in SADC Africa, but the whole world. So we really need to come up with a very solid strategy to say, as women, enough is enough. If you want our vote as women, we need to see your policies, your manifestos, their reflection of the bread and butter issues that are affecting women. Right now, women are struggling because of more unpaid, the burden of unpaid care and domestic work, poor social service delivery. Should we continuously vote for leaders who are not doing much in terms of eradicating poverty? So we really need to do a strong political analysis as women and say our vote is going to follow our mouth. As long as you have proved that you don't have the interest of women, young women, and women with disabilities at heart, we will not be able to give you our vote. As the majority women, we are the ones who determine the 2023 elections. We need to come together and support each other. There is a campaign that we are running, a very ambitious campaign as well, because hashtag She Elects, She Leads, 2.2 million votes for women from women, where we are motivating and encouraging and mobilizing women, one, to register to vote, but also vote for fellow candidates. So we need more of these initiatives so that women understand that it's not about just voting for a political party, but you need to vote for people who will make sure that they improve your well-being. When I was in in Zambia, I was interacting with taxi drivers, women working in supermarkets, and they were very clear as to why they were voting, whether they were voting for PF or for UPND, but they had reasons why they were doing that. So as Zimbabwean women and Zimbabweans in general, we need to move away from just voting for political parties because I'm a member. What are they offering? On the table? We have a tendency of getting into the polling booth. We look where is ZANU-PF, you vote for the ZANU-PF MP, councillor, president, you got the same for MDC, president, councillor, without even knowing who that person is. If someone wants their vote, they need to come and work for it because our vote costs a lot. And just in concluding, just to encourage young women to go out and register to vote, but not to forget to vote for women candidates. And thank you once again to the organizers. We hope we'll be able to put these lessons into practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Quite an interesting intervention there in terms of women participation. And I think it's a subject that is quite close to the heart of many in terms of how we can then be able to encourage more women participation in electoral processes, and also taking a leaf from Zambia in terms of how they managed to get the two political parties to field two female running mates, resulting in one being the vice president to say. Commissioner, I think the last one here, I think there are several issues that are coming out. The need for more engagement with political parties. I think this is something that is coming out quite predominantly, and I think there's quite a discussion around that subject. And I think also issues around transparency in results transmission. I think the Mohlate Commission actually recommended the automation of the results management system because of some of those suspicions that were arising from the 2018 elections. And I think also lastly, the role of the commission in terms of monitoring the media. I think the commission during 2018 had a media monitoring component. Nobody knows what that was for because they never censored the papers, and I think the report up to now has not been public. So those are some of the things that are coming up, but I would like you to maybe in your conclusion to address those and also to make your own recommendations as we go forward.
No, thank you very much, moderator. What we want to say as a commission is that we appreciate the views that have been expressed. A lot of them are very valuable, and indeed, a lot of them are going to be taken into consideration as we try to improve our electoral process. We are very much open to engagement with various stakeholders, and we have got a timetable and timelines under which to engage them. Like I said before, we have already begun the process, and certainly we will engage political parties. We will obviously invite them to come and engage with us. Our hope is that when political parties come to engage with us, they are not going to be accompanied by tens of thousands of their supporters who will be standing outside our offices and chanting all sorts of derogatory statements that undermine the integrity of the commission. We hope that it is going to be a formal engagement that does not bring the thousands that we have seen in other attempts to come and visit the commission. In terms of recommendations regarding improving our results transmission process, we have read that, and as we go to the next election, probably there will be attempts to try and see what can be changed, what works and what doesn't work. But certainly not every recommendation is going to be taken on board because some of the recommendations might be done in isolation from our circumstances. You know, like I said before, that we are part of the SADC Elections Commission's Forum, and actually Zimbabwe is current vice chairperson of the executive committee. There are recommendations that we have made to other sister commissions. For instance, we have made recommendations to Botswana Electoral Commission and said, Botswana Electoral Commission, can you improve your electoral process by ensuring that in your voting, you use translucent ballot boxes? Because currently they use trunks, those black trunks. The trunks that are like the ones that we carry to boarding schools are the ones that they use. When we ask them, can you use translucent ones? They have refused. They have said, these have worked very well for us since we got our independence in the 1960s. And we have no reason to change that just because it's a recommendation. They also don't count their election results in the polling stations or display them there. They carry their boxes to one central center, count them there, and then they announce results. Which is a little bit different from the recommendations that we have put to them. So just like other countries, I'm sure some things will work. For instance, the automation of a results transmission, in my view, might create even challenges that are like Kenya, because our technology is not as advanced as we are. I trust the manual system where the results are counted and posted outside and then carried physically to the command center with all signatures. For me, that works for now, but it's up to the commission to decide in future. Like I said, that I won't be part of it. And then the role of monitoring the media, the results of our media monitoring is out, is there. I'm not sure how you missed getting copies. If you have time, you can pick some from our office. But the results of our media monitoring do indicate that there has been a skewed coverage by the public media towards the ruling party and a skewed media by the private media towards the opposition political parties. Maybe in finality, I will say that there has been a lot of improvements in the electoral processes in Zimbabwe over years. Significant improvements that are best practice for many countries, regional and globally. At some stage, we need to have a sober engagement on what has changed over years and see how we can amplify and improve on that without being insultive to the Commission. Part of those things include how we have improved our voter registration to be polling station based, to be biometric. Part of those things include our counting of results and then transparency result in terms of how they are publicized outside. There's a lot that we can engage on. I'm sure at some stage, the institutions that we have here that have convened this meeting can call for a meeting where the Commission can be given an opportunity to show how we have improved our electoral process over years. You will see that we have come a long way and what we have done is very positive. Let me stop there and thank you for giving us the opportunity of putting us in the hot seat. We were expecting it and we are not unhappy about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And would like to appreciate the fact that you stayed here to engage with us. And I think we hope that these are more engagement sessions to come with the Commission. It's unfortunate that you are leaving, but we hope those that are going to replace you would also find it prudent that they would engage with forums such of this nature. So we appreciate that you took your time. We also appreciate the fact that you also managed to respond to some of our questions. I'm pretty sure there are still more to come, but I think it was important that we're here. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are exactly within the time frame that we had stipulated for this discussion, and would like to say this, we are coming to an end to this session. I would like to thank all our panelists. Susan from Zambia, thank you so much for the lessons learned. Arnold, we always learn quite a lot from your experience in terms of engagements in these discussions, particularly within the region, and the wisdom that comes with it. And we are very much appreciative of your presence. And we know very well that you are very busy, but you managed to stay with us for the last 3 hours. So we thank you so much for that. To our good friend, Stabile, thank you so much. We see the initiatives that you are also working on social media. And I think they are good initiatives that also needs to be uploaded and supported in terms of ensuring that we get more women to participate in elections. And would like to thank you so much for that participation. Her Eminence, she had to go for an early engagement, but we are very appreciative of the fact that she managed to get time from a busy schedule to be with us in this discussion. Roswitha, thank you so much for the youth perspective. And I think there's so much hope that is resting on the youth constituency in terms of participation in elections, drawing from lessons from Zambia. Would like to thank you so much for this participation and taking your time to be with us. Lastly, I think from ZESMI and our colleagues at CITE as well as at PRIS, would like to thank you all for participating in this engagement. Would like to believe that this is the beginning of more collaborative efforts between the number of organizations that we have, and would like to appreciate the fact that you did take your time to participate in this discussion. Lastly, I would also would like to thank, interestingly, we have, I'm currently based in Liberia, and we have a number of our civil society organizations that were following the discussions on Facebook, also trying to look at lessons learned, particularly from the Zambian elections, as well as situations going in Zambia. They are going for elections in 2023, and I think they've quite picked up a number of issues also from our panelists in terms of how they can also engage within the space that is provided. So from us, and the panelists as well as the organizing organizations, would like to thank you so much for participating, and hopefully we'll see you in future discussions of this nature. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay blessed.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.